Is the world about to get a new federal superstate? A Turkic superstate? Maybe, at least that's the viewpoint of one Baghdad Amreyev, the Secretary General of the Organization of Turkic States. On March 30th, 2021, Mr. Amreyev announced to the world that Turkey, Azerbaijan, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, and Uzbekistan would be meeting at a summit later this year with the express aim of creating a, quote, united state of the Turkic world. And the summit did take place in mid-November 2021. And yes, leaders did approve the Turkic World Vision 2040 plan, with an aim to enhance political solidarity and mutual support on vital issues of national interest. Will this process result in an unstoppable Turkic federation which spans from the edge of Europe right across Central Asia? Maybe. Hi, I'm Fredo Rockwell, and if you're like me, you've probably not paid much attention to the Organization of Turkic States before. One reason is possibly because it was just recently renamed. Before November summit, it was known as the Cooperation Council of Turkic-speaking countries, or more commonly just as the Turkic Council. The new name reflects the group's rising ambitions, but even then I suspect you may not have been aware of it. The Turkic Council was formed in 2009 and was originally the brainchild of Kazakhstan's former president, Nursultan Nazarbayev. At the group's inaugural summit, held at Nakhchivan, Azerbaijan, 4 member states, Azerbaijan, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, and Turkey, signed the founding charter, now known as the Nakhchivan Agreement. At roughly the same time, this really cool flag was designed. It has blue from the flag of Kazakhstan, a sun from the flag of Kyrgyzstan, a 6-pointed star from the Azerbaijan flag, and of course a crescent from the Turkish flag. Flags of international organizations can be a bit hit and miss in my opinion, but I actually really think this is a cool design. In 2018, the Turkic Council expanded for the first time with the addition of an observer member, Hungary. And yes, that one needs some explaining because Hungary is not a Turkic language-speaking state. Or is it? In 2019, Uzbekistan signed up to become the 5th full member, and in 2021, Turkmenistan was admitted as the group's 2nd observer state. According to some, Turkmenistan is on track to become a full member soon. As reflected in the new name, this is no longer just a club for reveling in national linguistic similarities. Organizational goals include increased economic, political, cultural, and security integration. To help with these goals, there are various Turkic satellite organizations. These include the International Organization of Turkic Culture, which is known, I kid you not, as Turksoy, which might sound like it's meant as an insult, but it's actually derived from the Turkish words for Turkish ancestry. Then there's the International Turkic Academy, which is also known as the Turkish World Educational and Science Cooperation Organization, which revels in the acronym TWESCO. There's the Turkic Business Council, which exists to help Turkic businesses, which, like one of the unpopular kids at school, lacks a cool nickname. The Center of Nomadic Civilizations, which despite the name exists to promote sports and organize sporting events. It's based in Bishkek, the capital of Kyrgyzstan, which is also the home of the World Nomad Games, which have been held since 2014. The 2022 edition of the Nomad Games are set to be held in Turkey, not far outside Istanbul, and the 2024 Games will be held in Azerbaijan. Sports at these games include horse racing, belt wrestling, and Kok Boru, which is a game played right across Central Asia and involves 2 horseback teams trying to gain control of a goat carcass. Then there is Turkpa, the Turkic Parliamentary Assembly, which is sort of the legislative arm of the Organization of Turkic States. This, however, is not like the European Parliament, the legislature of the European Union. Unlike the European Parliament, Turkpa doesn't have any actual legislative power, and its members are not directly elected. Turkpa is more of like a talking shop. It exists to foster cooperation between member legislatures, to provide election observers, and it votes on non-binding resolutions and that sort of thing. Now, the European Parliament began its history as just such a talking shop, and eventually it grew into a more powerful organization. So it's entirely possible that TURCPA could have a similar trajectory and maybe in coming decades might be a more powerful institution. So that's the what as far as the organization of Turkic states is. Now I think we need to answer the why. Other than providing opportunities for its leaders to appear statesmanlike on national television, is there any real purpose for the organization of Turkic states? Or is there any reason to think it might become more significant in future? And I would answer both of these questions with a qualified yes. Here's why. The linguistic and cultural ties between these countries are genuine, except for Hungary. The original Turkic civilizations originated in East Asia about 2,500 years ago. That's the most common theory anyway. For much of their history, the various Turkic peoples have been nomadic, and like many other nomadic peoples, have built their societies around the pastoral care of animals. One great place for living a nomadic pastoral lifestyle is on the Eurasian steppe, which is a vast grasslands which stretches all the way from Manchuria across Central Asia into Eastern Europe. With the steppe acting as a sort of continental superhighway, plus some extremely serious skills at horse riding and horseback archery, various Turkic peoples have conquered huge parts of the world, generally moving westward as they conquered, eventually making the transition from nomadic peoples into settled peoples in their new lands. So this explains the linguistic and cultural links which connect these people from the edge of Europe right across Asia. But I do think it's important not to overstate these ties. Yes, lots of countries speak a Turkic language, but that's a very broad linguistic category. English is an Indo-European language, but so are Persian, Russian, and Hindi. It's really hard to imagine the US, Russia, India, and Iran trying to broaden cooperation economically and politically based on a common Indo-European linguistic heritage. But there are some very real linguistic and cultural ties between these countries. I don't mean to minimize them either. And one other point, for centuries, the Central Asian Turkic countries have been controlled by the Russian Empire and after that by the Soviet Union. And it's only in recent decades that Turkey has had the opportunity to diplomatically connect with these countries. But honestly, I think the real drivers for the organization of Turkic states are the many advantages that the various national leaders gain from the organization. Here are some of the ones that I've spotted. Azerbaijan, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, and Kyrgyzstan are all members of the Commonwealth of Independent States, the organization for former Soviet republics. The CIS has long been an organization for Russia to project power over what it sees as its lost empire. So a strong organization of Turkic states could be a useful counterbalance for these countries trying to avoid too much domination by Russia. Now, Turkey has spent decades cozying up to the European Union and actually applied to become a member itself in 1987. That application process has stalled, partly because of Turkey's increasingly poor human rights record under President Recep Tayyip Erdogan, and also because of widespread popular discontent with the idea of Turkey joining the EU, basically granting freedom of movement to 83 million relatively poor Muslims spooks the bejesus out of the hard right in a lot of the EU. Turkish membership in the EU is still technically possible, but increasingly it's being seen as a non-starter. Instead of looking west, which has been Turkey's overriding national goal for well over a century, the Organization of Turkic States provides President Erdogan and Turkey with an opportunity to start building alliances towards the east. And although it isn't mentioned in any of the marketing material for the Organization of Turkic States, so far this very much seems to be a club for autocrats or aspiring autocrats. Of the 5 full member states, all 5 rank in the bottom half of the Democracy Index, the annual report produced by the Economist Intelligence Unit. Kyrgyzstan and Turkey are both rated as hybrid regimes, which means that they're a little bit democratic and a little bit authoritarian, while Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, and Azerbaijan sit towards the very bottom of the table with the fully authoritarian states. President Erdogan of Turkey has been leading his country towards a more authoritarian style of government since he took power in 2003. And this is something he gets a lot of flack from the European Union. But he can go to meetings of the Organization of Turkic States, safe in the knowledge that no one is going to criticize him for being too heavy-handed or oppressive towards his people. This might also explain why Hungary is so interested in possibly wanting to join this group, as its current leader, Prime Minister Viktor Orbán, also has serious authoritarian tendencies. But are the Hungarian people Turkic? No, they're not. Hungarian is a Finno-Ugric language, which is a completely different language family. It includes languages like Estonian, Finnish, and Mongolian. Now, it's long been claimed popularly that Hungarians are descended from another nomadic people called the Huns. They were a nomadic pastoral group like the Turks who swept down through the Eurasian steppe and conquered parts of Europe and Russia and other places like that. But the idea that modern Hungary is descended from the Huns is simply not true. It's a nationalistic fantasy which has been rejected by pretty much every serious scholar out there. But for the last 150 years or so, nationalist leaders in Hungary have clung to this myth and promoted it as a way to justify some of their policies. And there is another discredited parallel theory called Turanism, which arose in the middle of the 19th century. Turanism argues that Hungarians and other Finno-Ugric peoples are actually a branch of the Turkic peoples. In the mid-20th century, Turanism was embraced by Hungary's fascist party, the Arrow Cross Party, which used Turanism to help argue that Hungarians were, in fact, from a superior race. As I said, these pseudo-historical, pseudo-scientific theories have been totally discredited by modern scholarship, and their association with fascism has made these ideas taboo for most modern politicians. But not so taboo as to deter Hungary's current Prime Minister, Viktor Orbán. At a meeting of the Turkic Council in Kazakhstan in 2018, Orbán said, "Hungarians consider themselves late descendants of Attila, of Hun-Turkic origin, and Hungarian is a relative of Turkic languages, all of which is pure bunk." That same year, at a meeting of the Turkic Parliamentary Assembly, Turkpa, Speaker of the Hungarian National Assembly, Laszlo Kövér, said to the assembled dignitaries, "Our Turkic brothers have accepted us as one of them." Is Hungary's participation as an observer in the Organization of Turkic States just Viktor Orbán LARPing to a fascist fantasy? I think there's a bit more to it than just that. As I mentioned before, Viktor Orbán is trying to enact a more authoritarian style of politics in Hungary. And the European Union, which Hungary is a full member of, is regularly criticizing Orbán's policies. So cozying up to the Organization of Turkic States does provide Orbán with a safe space to express his autocratic tendencies. I haven't mentioned Turkmenistan yet. Like Hungary, it is now an observer state. Unlike Hungary, it is actually a Turkic language-speaking country. It's ruled by a pretty bizarre but brutal dictatorship. President Gurbanguly Berdimuhamedov does work hard on his personality cult. There's actually a giant gilded statue of him on horseback in the capital city of Ashgabat. So let's take a moment and examine the two directions of growth that the Organization of Turkic States might want to take if it did indeed want to grow into a federal superstate. These are inward growth and outward growth. By inward growth, I mean the cultural, political, economic sort of integration and cooperation that I described earlier. The things being led by the organizations like TWESCO and Turksoy. There is no formal Turkic security alliance, not yet. But member states do come together to discuss security issues. And there is evidence that an informal military alliance of sorts is starting to take shape. For example, at last month's summit, one of the main set pieces was the presentation of the Supreme Order of the Turkic World to President Ilham Aliyev of Azerbaijan. This was to mark Azerbaijan's military victory over Armenia in the Nagorno-Karabakh War of 2020. A war in which Azerbaijan recaptured much of the territory that Armenia had been occupying since the fall of the Soviet Union. Azerbaijan accomplished this with substantial and sustained Turkish military support. So just to be clear, the Turkic world came together to congratulate one Turkic country who, with the support of another Turkic country, defeated a non-Turkic country. This is not a formal military alliance, but you can kind of see the broad outlines of how one might take shape. And there is certainly appetite for mutual military support. And there's more. President Erdogan of Turkey called for increased cooperation between member states to fight terrorism. The terrorists Erdogan named included the Kurdish Workers' Party, the Islamic State, and the People's Defense Units of Syria. These last two operate primarily outside of Turkey's borders, in Iraq and Syria, So Erdogan's calling for help to fight terrorism is not just a call for help on a domestic front, like you might expect. Erdogan also called for the Turkish Republic of Northern Cyprus to be admitted as a member state. Northern Cyprus is an unrecognized republic on the island of Cyprus, a country which was established following the invasion of the Turkish military, and which so far has only been recognized as independent by Turkey. It's very much a breakaway republic in the exact same mold as the territory that Armenia had occupied in Nagorno-Karabakh, which was also established as a breakaway republic. So the hypocrisy on Erdogan's part here is pretty breathtaking. And adding Northern Cyprus to the club is not the only avenue for possible outward growth for the Organization of Turkic States. And this is where things get particularly interesting. Every country with a Turkic language majority is already a member, or an observer. But what about Turkic language minorities in other countries? The Uyghur people, who are currently being brutally oppressed by the People's Republic of China, also speak a Turkic language. And in fact, the proposed country that they hope to create would be called East Turkestan. There are also substantial Turkic-speaking minorities in northern Iran, and 3 million people called Turkmen who live in northern Iraq. And of course, there's Russia. Several of Russia's most independence-minded minorities speak Turkic languages, including the Tatars and the Bashkir people. And remember Turksoy, the International Organization for Turkic Culture? Among its official observer members, there are currently 3 Russian republics: Bashkortostan, the republic of the previously mentioned Bashkir people, Tatarstan, and Khakassia. Other observers in Turksoy include Gagauzia, an autonomous Turkic language-speaking part of Moldova, and of course the Turkish Republic of Northern Cyprus. It's pretty easy to imagine Russia, Iran, or China reacting really badly to a politically united voice for the Turkic people emerging onto the international stage, especially if military integration was added to the mix. But luckily for the autocrats of Russia, Iran, and China, I don't think there's very much chance that the autocrats in the Organization of Turkic States will actually allow the organization to grow into an actual federal superstate. Here's why I think that. Countries peacefully breaking apart is a pretty rare thing, but countries peacefully merging together is much rarer still. You could sort of say that North and South Yemen merged together peacefully, but the peace didn't last. It broke out into a civil war a few years later. And there is East and West Germany. Perhaps that's the only example, at least the only one I could think of 2 countries peacefully merging. And of course, they had previously been the same country, 40, 50 years before that. Sort of. The only meaningful attempt to integrate as a superstate really is the European Union. That's a project which is far from complete. A lot of people don't want it to ever be completed. And just getting to where they are now has taken decades. When dictators talk about state mergers, such as the proposed union state between Belarus and Russia, it's usually because one, or at least one of the dictators, thinks there's an angle where they might have an advantage. With the union state, the president of Belarus at the time, well, still the president, Alexander Lukashenko, thought that the president of Russia, Boris Yeltsin, was, well, let's just say it politely, a pretty weak character. Of course, a few years after the union state was proposed, Russia got a new president who is much more powerful and much more likely to boss Belarus around. And progress on the integration of Belarus and Russia has slowed because of this, at least for Lukashenko's part. He's much less enthusiastic about it now than he used to be. My guess is that the autocrats and wannabe autocrats who run the member countries in the Organization of Turkic States see an advantage in further integration for now. Further economic integration would certainly have benefits for all of the member countries. And of course, holding summits where you can give each other grand-sounding awards, that provides some very useful propaganda. And yes, Turkey can provide some very useful military support. Turkey has a massive military compared to much of the region, so it can offer that support, and maybe in exchange it could get some invaluable diplomatic support to help it normalize the status of Northern Cyprus. But will any of these political strongmen actually cede meaningful power to an organization that they can't directly control? I don't think so. So, at least for now, despite what Baghdad Amreyev said, I don't think there's much chance of a Turkic federal superstate emerging. Not for a while, at least. Thanks for watching. I'd be very interested to know if anyone watching this was familiar with the Organization of Turkic States, or TWESCO, or Turksoy. Before you watch this video, please let me know in the comments. And please also let me know if you think I'm wrong, if you think a muscular Turkic superstate is about to emerge. I'd be delighted to hear what you have to think. And I will see you guys in the next video.